I'm ready.
Welcome to Issues That Matter. My guest today is Charlotte Dennett, and Charlotte writes for Counterpunch, and I saw her article on the Counterpunch online magazine. So I contacted her, and her publicist contacted me, and we're gonna do a great interview on Gaza, and we're gonna talk about oil pipelines. So Charlotte. Um, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, well, the oil and gas connection to the Israel and Gaza war, as it's being called, is never discussed, which comes as no surprise to me because it's been this factor, which is huge in all the endless wars that we've been witnessing. In fact, going back as far as World War One, and it's not discussed because oil and gas are a national security matter. Oil is the fuel of the military, for one thing. So right there, the censorship starts, and that's what I discovered. But anyway, I've written a book called "Follow the Pipelines." Here's the Here it is. Follow the Pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
Subtitle: Uncovering the Mystery of a Lost Spy and the Deadly Politics of the Great Game of Oil. And I deliberately have a map on the front cover of this book. And you will see pipelines going from Iraq. One of them ends up in Haifa, and the other one is in northern Lebanon. Now, and then there's a third one with a dotted line. That's from Saudi Arabia and it goes to Lebanon. So I don't know where to begin, but let's focus on Gaza right now,
Mm-hmm.
okay? There are huge amounts of oil and gas off the coast of the eastern Mediterranean coast, and that includes Israel, Syria, and it also includes Gaza. It was in 2000, actually late 1999, that the gas off the coast of Gaza was discovered. British gas got involved. And so Arafat, who then controlled the West Bank, was very positive about this helping to develop a Palestinian state that would have autonomy if they could use this natural gas as part of their economic development. And what I discovered is that Likud party members who were in power um, tried to prevent this from happening. So that there were two major invasions of Gaza by Israel prior to the one after October 7th. And one of them was in 2009, and the other was in 2014. And both of them were to eliminate Hamas. This was stated to eliminate Hamas and to prevent the Palestinians from getting control over the Gaza field. And so this was covered. Haaretz covered it. A few people could find it, but never the mainstream media. I mean, even today, when there's discussions about this horrendous, I would call it genocidal invasion by Netanyahu, the earlier ones aren't mentioned, and they were deadly enough. I mean, the one in 2014 claimed 1,200 civilians. So anyway, there's now since this discovery in 2000, another discovery was made in 2010 of huge quantities of oil and gas off the coast of Israel. And I have a map in my book, and the whole thing is called the Levant or Levantine Basin. Levant is the Eastern Mediterranean countries, and the term derives from the French, but it means the sun is in the east, and so this is Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, I learned researching this whole issue because my father, who was America's first master spy in the Middle East, I never knew him. He died when I was 6 weeks old. I was born in Beirut, but his last mission was to go to Saudi Arabia and try to determine the route of a planned pipeline called the Trans-Arabian Pipeline. And when I first of all, I got his last report and I got his last letter before his plane crash after his visit to Saudi Arabia. And it was very revealing. He was talking about the problems they were having, where the pipeline would terminate on the Eastern Mediterranean, and the biggest problem at this time turned out to be Syria, which was highly nationalistic at the time, and its president Kuwatli was anti-Zionist. He did not want this pipeline to go through Israel, and and so that was part of my father's last report. Um, yeah, because the terminal point was either going to be Haifa, Palestine, or somewhere in Lebanon. My father favored Lebanon because there was less turmoil at the time, because the Jews were fighting the Arabs and the British for their independence at this time in 1947. My father died before Israel claimed its independence in 1948. But at any rate, when I found out how super sensitive this was, I also looked up the New York Times, and there was a fantastic article in the March 1947 issue. It was all about the pipeline and about the dangers of Russia getting involved. Isn't that interesting? That was like 75 years ago. I mean, the Russians have always been a problem, whether you call them Soviets or Russians, it's all competition. This is one thing, another thing I learned, is all competition among the majors to get the oil and control it. And pipelines are key, because how do you get the oil distributed? It's through pipelines mostly. I mean, tankers, yes, but overland pipelines. And this article in the New York Times emphasized that it was the military and financial protection of that pipeline was going to be a crucial issue in the coming years, for sure, because the Saudi oil was like a huge find, and the U.S. got the exclusive concession. This really pissed off the British, because they were part of a British mandate that had been established in Palestine after World War I. And they sensed that the Americans were coming on strong in the Middle East and were going to replace them, which in fact happened, because the Brits were really greatly weakened after World War II, and the Americans moved in. And as you know, there's been the steadfast support of Israel all the way through all the wars, right up to the present. Why? It's because it's the major bastion protecting the oil in the whole region. And what Netanyahu wants to do is, first of all, he wanted to open the Iraq pipeline that is on the cover of my book, that was built in the early 30s and closed in 1948 because of Israel's war for independence. And the Iraqis didn't want that pipeline going to what they considered, a European settler state, which in fact it was. But at any rate, yeah, he wanted it opened during the during the George W. Bush, his invasion in 2003. Netanyahu was quoted as saying, "Soon the oil will be flowing to Haifa, the oil of Iraq." And it didn't happen because there was too much turmoil and dispute, which is another factor when you're analyzing oil pipelines. My father wrote in a declassified document that I got by suing the CIA, by the way, that he wrote this in 1944. It was part of what he called an analysis of work of what was expected of him. He was head of counterintelligence. And he said, and it was a heavily redacted document, but it said the oil must be protected at all costs. end quote. And one of the things that I learned in my investigation was that this is like a meme that's continued all the way up to the present. I didn't say how my father died. He went to he went to Saudi Arabia, and then he went to Ethiopia, and he boarded a plane with five other Americans, and they spent the night in Asmara, Eritrea, and then they took off. And about, I don't know, 10 minutes later, the plane crashed, and it crashed into a mountain. They were all killed. And one of the things I found all the contents that were discovered. I found the accident report, and there was very sensitive communications equipment on the plane.
Charlotte, do
Yeah,
you think it was a murder?
I definitely think it was sabotage. Oh yeah, because
Okay.
I later talked to one of the CIA people that replaced my father in the Middle East. He said, your father was highly prized. There'd never been anyone quite like him because he became a scholar of Islam. And also Middle Eastern history and European history. That was at Harvard. And he was very devoted to the people of the Middle East. He got totally sucked in. First teaching in a American University, Beirut, fresh out of Harvard. Then he went back, wrote his thesis, and got plucked into the OSS, Wartime Office of Strategic Services. And so I did discover that he was highly prized and unique. So they were very saddened by his loss. And then this one CIA guy said to me, and I think he had a little bit too much wine, because I talked to him during a reception of ex spooks. Okay. I was
Mm.
tipped off by the archivist that this was going to, at the National Archives, that this was going to happen. So we went to this reception. I talked to this CIA guy, and he said, we always thought it was sabotage, but we could never prove it. For me, that was a vindication of the research I was doing throughout the 80s and 90s and 2000s. I mean, intermittent. I'm also a lawyer. Um, but I was able to get a lot of information and finally put it into this book, Follow the Pipelines. And the book tells the whole story about what everybody suspects, that it's about oil. What I do is I pinpoint it. I show exactly where it was about oil. I've got 10 maps in the book that explain the civil war in Syria that began in 2011. It explains the Iraq War, what that had to do with the IPC, Iraq Petroleum Company pipeline, which Netanyahu wanted reopened but failed. It's about Iran, it's about Yemen, it's all there. And so, what I want is for people to get a hold of this book, because here's the history that you need, and we need the history, we need the context. I'm, among others, very upset about what happened, both in the ferocity of the Hamas attacks, and there's stuff coming out that is chilling, frankly. Part of it is witness reports that the Israeli Defense Force was actually firing on them when they were trying to escape. Some of them as hostages of Hamas, and like, why would they be doing that? Because there apparently was a military directive um, that said that you got to kill everybody, because we don't want hostages taken. Well, in fact, they were taken, and there's a lot of about why had this happened, because Israel is so heavily monitored. It's probably one of the most monitored countries in the world, next to you know New York City and Washington, D.C.
What do you mean by monitored?
Oh, I mean security. It's total, they got cameras everywhere. And and
Okay.
and now some of the people involved are starting to speak out, and they're saying, come on, if if a butterfly lands on the wall in Gaza, it's going to be detected. Okay, they knew. The whole point is, and this has also come out there a year ago. There was a internal report. This is reported by the New York Times that that Hamas was planning a very sophisticated raid. Okay, and the report came from a woman, and I think that may have affected them not taking it seriously. But at any rate, yeah, and she has since, if my memory serves me, she's since spoken up. And now there's a lot of talk about why the army waited 7 hours before coming in, and there that's been partially debunked. The police were there, so, but the army took a long time to go after Hamas. And the other thing is that Netanyahu was forewarned by Egyptian intelligence shortly before the October invasion happened by Hamas. Egypt's been monitoring Gaza very closely for years. They're neighbors, and there's economic connections, which I can go into, but they told Netanyahu was going to happen. And so then there were these massive breaches, and Israelis that have experience in securing areas have spoken out and said this is ridiculous. You cannot have these breaches and not have it discovered. So my thesis is that Benjamin Netanyahu let it happen. And that's why, you know, he calls it Israel's 9/11. Oh my goodness. 9/11, many people felt that Bush let that happen. And but I'm not going to go into that right now. But I find it really interesting that Netanyahu says this is Israel's 9/11, because frankly, he was in touch with people in New York City right before 9/11. And so for me, I
Oh,
find that,
Netanyahu?
oh yeah, he was in touch with Larry, I think his name is Silverman, who at the time had if not owned, leased the towers.
Right.
And this was right before, it was the day before. There's been phone conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Netanyahu wanted that to happen uh, because he wanted to connect the Iraq oil pipeline to Haifa. Soon the oil will be flowing to Haifa, he says, right afterwards. He thought it was all set up, everything was going to work. And the reason it didn't work, that was in 2003, is because they wanted, the plan was to overthrow Saddam Hussein and replace him with a man named Chalabi, who was living in exile at the time, but they were going to put him in as the president, and everything would be hunky dory because Chalabi was in favor of reopening that pipeline. But what happened is Chalabi was discovered to be the person who had created the weapons of mass destruction lie for the pretext, of going in, get rid of the weapons of mass destruction. So after that was discovered, he was completely discredited. They couldn't have him as president. So Netanyahu's dream of opening up that Iraq pipeline was deferred. But now my guess is he still wants that to happen. And what Netanyahu wants to do is develop an energy corridor all along the Eastern Mediterranean. And then there would be pipelines that could take the oil and natural gas off the coast of the Eastern Mediterranean and ship it to Europe. And now we connect this to Ukraine, by the way. Ukraine, the Europeans are beginning to get worried. Winter is coming, and they don't have the cheap supply of natural gas that Russia was providing them. So, the Biden administration has been looking everywhere to find sources of natural gas, and lo and behold, they're looking at Israel. Okay, so now you got to look at a map. I'm telling you, it explains so much, and they're all in my book. Um, I think Netanyahu's end game is wipe out Hamas, wipe out Gaza. This has been documented as part of the plan. You've already seen so much of it being leveled. And then what they're going to do, get rid of the Palestinians. You'll never have any financial protection of those pipelines unless everything is controlled and there's no unrest. So, bingo, get rid of Hamas, they think, uh, push them into Egypt, although Egypt's not going along with this. But that's the plan. And when you destroy these radicals and their supporters, then you can build the pipelines. I think it's going to take a long time, and the whole thing is backfiring on Netanyahu. He's going to be rid of after this. But anyway, you note that when people say, how could this have happened? How could you let this happen? And he kept saying, look, we're in a war. We'll talk about that later. So he's the wartime president right now, and he's calling all the shots. He's so obsessed with this idea of ridding Israel of the Palestinians that he will not follow American directives. So this has put the Biden administration in a real bind because here they have been in lockstep with Israel for 7 decades, and Biden continued the tradition, but Netanyahu is not obeying. And so now there's the whole question of how can the Biden administration support pipelines? I mean, support. Let me backtrack. How can Biden militarily support genocide in Gaza? I mean, that's what it's come down to. It's very embarrassing for him, and I don't know how it's going to end, but it's horrific, and I think there is definitely the U.S. and Saudi Arabia and Israel, they all had plans for developing this area. There's a thing called the Ben Gurion Canal that's planned that starts from the tip of Gaza and goes south and eventually into the Gulf of Aqaba. That's controlled by Jordan, but it's very close to Israel. And then you go down south a little farther, and then you'll see on the map is Saudi Arabia. And there's a whole plan for a futuristic techno city called Neom. So if this canal is actually built, it's a way of connecting with the Saudis. And at the same time, it's an alternative to the Suez Canal, and it'll be cheaper for ships to go through there. So this is part of the plan. And the United States, there are documents showing that the United States will support Israel during this oil and gas development. I think that also explains why Biden's gone along with getting rid of Hamas, but the civilian casualties now at what, 17,000? Is that where we are now in Gaza? I mean, the whole world is appalled. The General Assembly voted overwhelmingly for a ceasefire. And now Biden is pressing for one finally. I think not openly yet. He opposed the UN resolution, Security Council resolution for a ceasefire, and the United States vetoed it. And I think they did because they have this great scheme in mind, but it's not going as planned. Just as Netanyahu's plan for the reopening of the Iraq pipeline in 2003 didn't go as planned. It's hard to plan things in the Middle East. I mean, goodness, I was a journalist there during the 70s, and wow, what an education. I mean, there's so much I don't know, rivalries between clans and divisions, and I think the oil companies and those who profit from them have been involved in divide and rule. And that's why we got Arabs against Jews. They used to live together. And now, there's just, oh my God, there's so much hatred instilled in both for various reasons. But incredible indoctrination of the Jews of Israel, and I would say the Jews all around the world, about what Israel is and has become. And it's tragic because, yes, the victims of the Holocaust were able to escape and settle into Palestine. You have them certainly never forgetting. And then throughout the history, the what's been presented to the world is that here is this crucial enclave to save Jews and surrounded by a sea of Arabs, and we have to support them militarily. And so there's no other country that's got so much support, military support. And people have to ask why. I mean, it's how billions of dollars. Well, my opinion is Israel has become the protector of the oil, for better or worse. And that's why, Israel has how many nukes. That used to be a big secret. I can't even tell you how many, but there are a lot. And the whole Arab world knows this. And then the very advanced military equipment, spying equipment, and so on. Um, but Netanyahu is like his determination to do what he always wanted to do and screw the rest of the world. We're going to do it. And he thinks he can get away with it because they're victims of the Holocaust. And the propaganda that's been spewing forth that if you criticize Israel, you're anti-Semitic, that isn't going over so well anymore. A lot of people are catching on.
Mm,
You can't silence the critics and claim that they're being anti-Semitic. And some of the bravest people who are saying that are Jews who belong to Jewish Voice for Peace. And
mhm,
I stand with them. I applaud them. I hope more people will join up with them, because they see through. They see through all the mythology about Israel. They're absolutely appalled by the genocide, and it's just clear. We're watching genocide on TV. I mean,
mhm,
it's insane. So
mm.
there's my spiel.
Wow. Wow. So this is going to be an ongoing situation for a while, wouldn't you say?
Well, Netanyahu says so. He's saying, "Screw you, world. We're going to do what we have to do." And as I said, I have it documented that this is his plan. Okay, get rid of Hamas and make sure the Palestinians don't get a hold of that oil and natural gas.
Mm,
It's a whole nother topic that would require some time because Netanyahu actually had money poured into Gaza to support Hamas. This is
mhm,
coming out now, and the Israelis are just, why were you doing that? Um, I don't know for sure why, but one theory is that now that Hamas is there, he's got the excuse. Um, well, that doesn't make sense either. If you want to support, oh yes, here's the thing: by having Hamas in Gaza, he was able to separate it from the Palestinian Authority. And it's the Palestinian Authority that was working with British gas to develop all that oil and natural gas. And when Netanyahu had the Israelis withdraw from Gaza in 2005, um, then you had Hamas, an election, and the people overwhelmingly chose Hamas as the leaders because they thought that the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank was corrupted. Doesn't mean all of them supported Hamas, but a lot of them did. And so by having Gaza there, he could claim they have no right. They have no right to it. It would have been the Palestinian Authority. And now the US is trying to bring the Palestinian Authority back as part of the two-state solution. Uh, Netanyahu will not go along with that now. He'll say they're all terrorists. We got to get rid of them. In other words, he set them up. He set them up and for this horrendous, horrible war. And yeah, I'm not sure it's going to end anytime soon, frankly. But it's putting the Biden administration in a very, very bad position. And that's horrible for us that think of like who's going to be our next president. Could Trump actually beat Biden? This is serious. What's happening in this country is very serious.
Right, right. I totally agree with you. So, Charlotte, everything that you have said is absolutely amazing. I really loved your the conversation, even though I said practically nothing. But I would love to have you back on Issues That Matter to give commentary about this ongoing conflict. Would that be something you'd like to do?
Of course. Oh, the only thing I can do is try to give out information. That's all I can do, but
Right.
if enough people are informed, I don't know, may make a difference. I am so heartened by all the demonstrations around the world, and I think it's freaking out the US. The US is in a very bad position right now. Let's see what happens. It's
So I will
nuclear.
right.
Yeah.
I'll introduce you to some of my friends. You have been listening to Charlotte Dennett. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. If you like this really enlightening and important interview, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Charlotte, it's been a pleasure, and thank you everybody for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you, Cynthia.